Playing it safe isn't always a bad thing.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Locked On Falcons, part of Locked On Podcast Network, now the number one sports podcast network in all of the galaxy. Today's Locked On Falcons is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. If you don't know me, I'm your humble host, Aaron Freeman. Been covering the Atlanta Falcons for almost 2 decades, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP, going into my second decade as the illustrious, humble host of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. And on today's Locked On Falcons podcast, we are breaking the news that Kevin Stefanski has been named the next Atlanta Falcons head coach. I wish I looked up how many head coaches this would be in team history. I'm sure it's like 20-something, whatever that number is. And we'll break down what Stefanski's bringing to the table, what's going to be potentially the strengths of the Kevin Stefanski-led offense in Falcons, what are some of the question marks surrounding Kevin Stefanski. We'll talk about the potential staff hirings, changes, dismissals, retentions that could also help indicate what the sort of identity of this football team will be in the future. And then we'll wrap up talking about, what's next, right? The GM search and sort of where the Falcons are potentially headed with that. But starting the conversation talking about this hire, it's a safe hire. It's kind of a middle of the road hire, right? You get a proven head coach who's had success, obviously 2-time coach of the year, led the Cleveland Browns to the playoffs twice in his first 4 seasons in Cleveland, first in 2020 with Baker Mayfield, then in 2023 with a revolving door at quarterback. But, sort of the final one that really pushed that team over the hump down the stretch was Joe Flacco. And then you had, his 2 years between those 2 points. That was 2023. Where the Browns were, I think, were 8-9 and 7-10, and then you had the last 2 seasons where they have been a combined 8-26. And Stefanski, for various reasons that we'll sort of touch on today, is going to be a polarizing choice because some people look at his track record in Cleveland and see the downside. Some people look at his track record in Cleveland and see the upside. Right? It's kind of 2 versions of Kevin Stefanski. The coach that was in the first 4 years of his stint in Cleveland that included those 2 playoff appearances. I think the general vibe on Kevin Stefanski in those years that he was a good head coach. He was a good offensive mind that I think it was far more positive surrounding Kevin Stefanski during that period of time than what has been the case the last 2 years, which has been far more negative. And the question is going to be which version of Kevin Stefanski is going to show up in Atlanta. If you think it's going to be the guy that led the Cleveland Browns of all teams to the postseason twice, right? The only coach, I think, since Marty Schottenheimer in the late 1980s that has done that in Cleveland. Maybe Belichick went to the playoffs twice, but I don't recall in the early 90s. But, Locked On Browns would know. But if you think that's the coach you're getting here in Atlanta, then you're going to be positive about this hire. You're going to be a lot more optimistic about what Stefanski could do here in Atlanta. If you think the real Kevin Stefanski is the guy that has existed the last 2 years that had to give up play calling twice in that period of time to Ken Dorsey and Tommy Rees, that couldn't really get those Browns teams to look like a well-coached team the last 2 years, you think that's the real Kevin Stefanski, then you're going to be very down on this hire. Now, for me, I kind of fall in the middle. I don't know which side to pull. I've talked with various people, and I think I've mentioned that on this podcast over the last week. I'm still in the process of doing my homework on Kevin Stefanski to kind of know which side I lean. Early in the process, I think I lean more towards the first 4 years, the positive side. And then as I've learned and learned more, I've leaned kind of back in the other direction. And so probably where I'm at, is the safe choice, which is, planting your flag in the middle. And to me, the question with that is going to be, is that dramatically better if the truth is in the middle, right? Again, we don't know. We'll find out. Is that an upgrade to what the Falcons have basically had for the last 8 years? I would be questioning that. And so that's going to be the big story, that we're going to keep watching with Kevin Stefanski. Now, I think if you're particularly positive about Kevin Stefanski, and I think one of the reasons why you could lean towards the good version of Kevin Stefanski is because of Bijan Robinson. That essentially, when you look at those first 4 years in Cleveland and you look at what's the difference between the Browns from 2020 to 2023 and the Browns from 2024 onward, it's the run game, right? The number that jumps out at you is in all of those years, the Browns in those successful years from 2020 to 2023, the Browns were like a top 5 team in terms of run rate and were, I think, top 12, top 5, if not top 10 in all of those years in terms of running the football. And that was spearhead primarily because of Nick Chubb. And that was what those Browns teams were known for. Nick Chubb, great run game, great offensive line. And that was what the Browns really leaned on. Now, the last couple of years, the offense has basically been the worst offense in the league based off of whatever advanced metric that you look at it, DVOA, EPA, whatever. It's the worst offense in the league the last 2 years. And they've been much more successful defensively with the presence of Jim Schwartz in those years. But I think you can feel optimistic that the run game is going to work with Kevin Stefanski. Another staple of the true Stefanski offense, because so much of Stefanski's downfall, which we'll touch upon, you can argue was because of the presence of Deshaun Watson, right? And for the Falcon fans that know your history, the Falcons were this close, and for the audio listeners, my fingers are very, very close together to getting Deshaun Watson, and the Browns swooped in and got Deshaun Watson instead of the Falcons, saved the Falcons from the worst trade in NFL history. And, there's been a lot of talk, especially since Stefanski's dismissal, that he wasn't necessarily on board with the Deshaun Watson, but he was willing to make it work, do his best to make it work. And it didn't work. And starting in 2022, you started to see the offense change to kind of suit itself towards Deshaun Watson. Like those first 2 years, they ran almost exclusively under center play action. Starting in 2022, they lean much more heavily on shotgun. Now, I don't know if they're going to run pistol. That was not something that Kevin Stefanski did really at all in Cleveland. So if those of you that are, ding dong, the wicked witch is dead, the pistol is dead, you may be celebrating at this point in time. But I think this hire is great for Bijan. The question is going to be, is this hire going to be great for any other thing? Because with the passing game in Cleveland, you had diminishing returns the longer Kevin Stefanski was there. Now, again, the quarterback situation, going from Baker Mayfield, who was healthy and good in 2020, to injured and less good in 2021, to Jacoby Brissett as a bridge before Deshaun Watson steps on the field. Then Deshaun Watson comes in, and the Browns' offense stinks, but their defense is really good and the number one defense in the NFL that year. So they're winning games, even though Deshaun Watson's playing terribly in 2023. Then he gets injured. Flacco comes in. Oh no, that was 23. Sorry, my timeline's a little bit off. But Flacco comes in, kind of saves their season. The offense gets hot towards the end of the season. Then 24, Watson comes back. He gets injured again. Then it's like Jameis Winston and a revolving door, DTR, Dorian Thompson, Robinson. I think Bailey Zappi was in one of those years. And then this year, the whole Dylan Gabriel, Shedeur Sanders, Joe Flacco revolving door. And, part of the negativity towards Stefanski, I think it comes from Shedeur Sanders fanboys poisoning the well. We kind of touched upon this not too long ago with Charles McDonald on the podcast, talking about Shedeur Sanders and all the heat he was getting for not necessarily praising Shedeur Sanders. And that's part of it. Again, I don't know how much part of that is, but there were a lot of people that felt like Kevin Stefanski did Shedeur Sanders wrong. And I'm sure a lot of people will sort of translate to what does that mean for Michael Penix, right? And again, that remains to be seen. The big question hanging over the Falcons is going to be the quarterback situation. With Stefanski being hired, to me, the probability that Kirk Cousins is the Falcons' week 1 starter just shot up. Again, I'm not going to say he shot through the roof, because the thing with Kirk is he wants money and he wants security. The Falcons are very likely to cut Kirk, but they could bring him back at a cheaper contract. And so I don't think money is going to be the challenge for the Falcons to bring Kirk back. The question is going to be security, right? That the thing, Kirk doesn't want somebody breathing over his shoulder. Michael Penix, coming off the injury, could be breathing over his shoulder, and that's going to factor into that whole situation. But because Stefanski had a lot of success with Kirk Cousins in 2019, You know, I think he's going to look at Kirk Cousins and say, like, yeah, I know this guy can run my offense. And when you look at sort of the traditional Stefanski offense, which was, to me, the offense they ran when Baker Mayfield was there, Kirk fits very well into that style of offense. And I could definitely see Stefanski, doing that. So, tomorrow we'll be talking with Locked On Browns, and he'll give his thoughts on Kevin Stefanski, the reasons for his demise and whatnot, and why he thinks he could work in Atlanta. As we continue to unpack this, as I sit here today, kind of like the Matt Ryan, like I'm kind of lukewarm on this hire just because it just feels like a safe sort of hire that doesn't necessarily, to me, immediately scream to me that this is going to move the needle for what the Falcons have been the last 2, 5, 8 years. But like the Matt Ryan hire, this move could obviously grow on me as I do my research. As you guys well know, that I like to do my research on these things. And so, it's just sort of really unpacking all the baggage that comes with Kevin Stefanski and sort of deciding which side do you fall on. Is he the coach that existed for the first 4 years, or is he the coach from the last 2 years in Cleveland? And that ultimately, I think, is going to determine where you feel on this hire. But as I said, it's a proven hire. In terms of a guy that's proven he can be a successful head coach, semi-successful, again, depending on what your definition of success is, and that just feels familiar. It feels a lot like what the Kevin Stefanski Browns teams were just like a different version of what we wanted the Arthur Smith Falcons teams to be. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. The question to me is going to be, I think he can build a Bijan-centric offense. The question is, can he grow beyond that? But I think a lot of those questions might be answered depending on who he brings to fill out his coaching staff. Who's his offensive coordinator, right? We're expecting Jeff Ulbrich to come back as the defensive coordinator. And then I think the other big question is going to be, who's the offensive line coach? Is it Dwayne Ledford? And if it is Dwayne Ledford, that, or not, that could really kind of move the needle a lot in terms of maybe this is going to be different than what we've seen from the Falcons the last couple of years. And we'll break that down as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. Now, if you've ever wished to be that number 1 overall draft pick at quarterback, you can live out your dreams with the mobile game called Ultimate QB Football Legend. Step in the cleats of the number 1 draft pick at quarterback, and it's your job to lead your team to greatness and turn your franchise around. Ultimate QB Football Legend is the number 1 QB career mode game in the mobile app stores, and it introduces the most realistic environment with full career control. You can sign contracts, train, build chemistry with your teammates, give input to your GM on roster moves, play actual games in 2D, and rise through the ranks to become a pro football legend. Totally free to play, no ads, 100% offline, so you can sneak in a quick game or two when you're on the go. Just head over to ultimate-qb.com. That's ultimate-qb.com, or search Ultimate QB in your app store. And there's something special for you guys. If you use the promo code Locked On in all caps in the game store, you'll get a free boost at the start of your career. Ultimate QB Football Legend, QB1, it is your legacy. And since it's a new year, it's time to simplify. And one way you can do that with easy, reliable dinner plans. And that's why I want to tell you about today's sponsor, Home Chef. Home Chef takes the stress out of cooking by delivering fresh, pre-proportioned ingredients right to your door with easy-to-follow recipes that actually taste great. They're rated number 1 by users of other meal kits for quality, convenience, value, taste, and recipe ease, and it's easy to see why. Meals come ready to fit your schedule with a wide variety of options. Family-sized meals, quick lunches. If you're looking for different dietary needs and choices, they got you covered. And you can also save time and money because customers save an average of $86 per month on groceries with Home Chef. So for a limited time, Home Chef is offering my listeners 50% off your first box with free shipping, as well as free dessert for life by just going to homechef.com/lockedon. That's homechef.com/lockedon for 50% off your first box, free shipping, and free dessert for life. You must be an active subscriber to receive the free dessert. So continuing today's Locked On Falcons, I want to thank each and every one of you that is an everydayer of the pod. And you are the reason why Locked On is the number 1 sports podcast network in the galaxy. And if you want to level up your everydayerness, you can join the Everydayer Club, which lots of perks, ad-free version of the podcast, but you also get exclusive Discord access for a Locked On Podcast Network, and you can go in there and talk trash with other everydayers from around the NFC South. But another perk is you get to talk draft with not only me, but all the other Locked On hosts, as well as the Locked On College hosts. So you can directly ask, if you're curious about a prospect, instead of hitting me up and like, Aaron, what do you think about this? You can go directly to the source, to Locked On Sooners, Locked On Georgia Tech, Locked On Bulldogs, etc., and hit those people up for that. So you can do that and join the Everydayer Club at the link in the description below at lockedonfalcons.supercast.com. It's only $5 a month or $50 a year. So go check it out in the link in the description below. So the big question with Kevin Stefanski's hire is, who's going to be his OC, his DC, and some of the other components on the staff. And I think the big question is, will he retain Jeff Ulbrich? And at least the early reporting, and again, I don't know what the current reporting is going on around the NFL. You guys maybe in the chat have a better idea. I'm quickly reading through Twitter to sort of see if there's been any updates that Jeff Ulbrich is definitely coming back. But the early buzz, at least early today on Saturday, when it was first reported that the Falcons had moved up, their meeting with Kevin Stefanski, essentially because they didn't want to get leapfrogged like they did with the Giants, right? Where the Giants got John Harbaugh. There were reports, as we talked about back on, I think, Thursday, that, Kevin Stefanski was the plan B for either the Giants or the Falcons. And Stefanski was supposed to meet with the Titans on Sunday, and the Falcons moving up this interview to Saturday to leapfrog the Titans strongly suggested that Stefanski was going to be the guy, and it was just kind of a matter of time. And obviously that confirmation came down late Saturday evening. But, the early reporting on Saturday was that, Stefanski will be open or amenable to retaining Jeff Ulbrich as the defensive coordinator. I think that's part of the reason why the Falcons tried to move quickly on this hire, because they didn't want to lose out on another coach like they did with John Harbaugh, and it gives them a more higher probability that they could retain someone like Jeff Ulbrich. And it makes total sense that Stefanski will keep Jeff Ulbrich. Jim Schwartz was his DC the last couple of years in Cleveland, running a wide 9, 4-3 over sort of scheme that Jeff Ulbrich ran with the New York Jets. Obviously, this past year in Atlanta, Ulbrich blended that with more of a 3-4 defense from Raheem Morris and whatnot. But they could definitely lean more on that 4-3. And I think Stefanski will be definitely open to that style of defense. Just because it's been so successful with the Browns these last 3 years with Schwartz there in Cleveland. Nate Ollie served under Jim Schwartz when he was the DC in Philadelphia. So I think there's a good probability that Nate Ollie will be retained, as well as, some other potential Ulbrich, defensive assistants like Mike Rutenberg or whoever else. So we'll see on that front. Jerry Gray, I think, is probably a good bet to also be retained. He did serve with Stefanski in Minnesota when Stefanski was, I think, an assistant for like 4 or 5 different head coaches in Minnesota. Leslie Frazier, Brad Childress, if I'm not mistaken, Mike Zimmer for the most part, but they both were on that Zimmer staff in Minnesota. To me, the questions are going to be kind of what is Stefanski's offensive coaching staff going to be, because that's going to help kind of dictate what this offense is going to look like. And I think the big question is not just the offensive coordinator. We'll talk about that in a second, but I think a lot of it's going to be who's the offensive line coach. If the Falcons choose to retain Dwayne Ledford, I think Dwayne Ledford's, let me say this. I think Dwayne Ledford's a good coach. My concern with Dwayne Ledford is I think the Falcons offensive line has peaked under Dwayne Ledford. What they did in 2022 was their peak, and it's been kind of diminishing returns since then, and I don't expect them to get back to their peak anytime soon. And I don't think that's a reflection of Dwayne Ledford's coaching ability. I just think it's a reflection of sort of the general complacency that you've seen over the last, several years with Dwayne Ledford at the helm, where they're going to trust in their guys. Like they've coached pretty much the same group for 5 years now, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. And that's a concern to me that we're not going to necessarily unpack on today's episode, but we will probably unpack in the days, weeks, and months ahead. I think I will feel a lot better about the Stefanski hire if he's able to bring Bill Callahan, who spent the last 2 years serving under his son, Brian, as the offensive line coach with the Titans, but was really the catalyst for those Browns' success. He's one of the best offensive line coaches in football and proved that over those first 4 years in Cleveland. The reason for that is because Callahan the Browns under Stefanski, Stefanski has this reputation of being a Kubiak guy. He's not really a Kubiak guy. He ran Gary Kubiak's offense 1 year, his last year in Minnesota, that got him the job in Cleveland. And then he brings in Bill Callahan, and their run game is much more of a gap run scheme. It runs wide zone, but they've always been towards the bottom of the league in wide zone usage relative to the rest of the league. And so the perception, I think, in general is that it's the same offense as Gary Kubiak or Clint Kubiak. It's a wide zone based offense. And it's not really. It's much more of a gap run scheme. And so essentially the whole Ledford-Callahan thing is, if they retain Ledford, it's going to be because they're going to continue to run the wide zone. And as you've heard me say over the last calendar year, I think the Falcons, in order to get better offensively in the run game, I think they have to diversify away from the wide zone. I think they started to do that this past year. I like them moving in that direction. I would like to see them continue moving in that direction. And basically what I'm saying is, if they retain Ledford, I don't know if they're going to continue moving in that direction. If they hire Callahan, I think they will definitely move in that direction. And so that will give me a little bit more hope that this offense will evolve past where it has been by and large these last 5 years, when they've basically had the exact same run scheme with two different head coaches. The offensive coordinator is going to factor into that. The buzz is that he might bring Tommy Rees, who was his offensive coordinator last year, that he gave play calling duties towards in the second half of this 2025 season. Rees is, I got to do more research, but I don't see a lot of people saying a lot of positive things about Tommy Rees is basically what I've seen. Drew Petzing, I think, is another option, because Petzing served under Stefanski in Minnesota, spent the last 3 years as the Cardinals offensive coordinator. Petzing has at least a little bit better reputation amongst like NFL people that I, listen to. So that would give me a little bit more optimism about, what Stefanski could do if he were to hire Petzing as his OC, but we'll sort of see on that front. So I think, this coaching staff and some of the choices that are made there are going to be noteworthy in terms of determining what the future of this Falcons offense and their identity is going to look like. Are they going to be basically the same run scheme, or are they going to evolve past that, diversify past that, or, we'll see. But, the hallmarks of the Stefanski offense are running the football, lots of tight end usage. That's why I made the comparison to Arthur Smith, because, I believe from 2020 to 2023, the Falcons were number 1 in the NFL or across those 4 seasons in utilizing multiple tight ends on the field. And the Browns were like number 3, if I'm not mistaken. But that's why I make that Arthur Smith comparison. So a lot of 12 personnel, a lot of 13 personnel. We'll see if they bring back the fullback, right? There's a chance, right? Because the version of Stefanski's offense with Baker Mayfield had a fullback. Once they brought in Deshaun Watson, they kind of scrapped the fullback from the offense. So I think they're going to go back to that early version of the team. So, that'll also get me excited if the Falcons bring back a fullback. So you guys know how I roll when it comes to that sort of thing. So we'll see what the coaching staff looks like. Big step next for the Falcons is going to be who they're going to hire as their GM. That's kind of the next step. They talked about, we're going to interview more guys. They have not interviewed more guys since they said they were going to do that. And I'm skeptical whether or not they're going to do that. Probably a lot. Well, that will depend on what happens Sunday in that Bears game. It looks like the 49ers are about to lose unless they can mount a 35-point comeback in the next minute, which, I don't think it's possible even against the Atlanta Falcons, So we'll see on that. So we'll break down sort of the GM search as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So there's nothing like being at the game, the crowd noise, the energy, the cheering alongside other fans. But, getting into the stadium can be a little tough, because it can be tough getting tickets, whether it's, waiting in queues, dealing with logins, watching prices change at checkout. That's why Game Time is here. It's the app that gives the advantage back to the fans. It takes the guesswork out of buying tickets to your favorite events, whether it's sports, comedy, music, theater, whatever is near you. And what we love about Game Time is what you see is what you get. Right? The price you see is the price you pay. And the panoramic seat views also allow you to get no surprises when you show up at your event, right? The price you see is what you pay means no hidden fees at checkout. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today and get back to being there live. Now, guys, playoffs are here, and FanDuel's officially in playoff mode. Every game day during the NFL playoffs, FanDuel is going to give customers even more ways to get in on the action, because right now, every NFL playoff game day, FanDuel is providing a profit boost pack waiting for you inside the app. Each game day, you'll see a pack loaded with multiple profit boosts that you can apply to all the bets that you like. Next, open your profit boost pack first thing on game day and see what boost you want to apply. And they allow you to lean into whatever you feel like leaning into, right? Whether you're, wanting to back the momentum, the defense, the quarterback, or the coaching, whatever feels good to you, FanDuel's going to give you that little bit of extra juice rather than forcing you to have to bet something you don't like. So make your picks, then apply those profit boosts to go after even bigger payouts as the playoffs are rolling. So visit FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL, and grab your profit boost pack every NFL playoff game day. So let's wrap up today's Locked On Falcons talking about the GM search, right? The expectation has been all along that it would be Bears assistant GM Ian Cunningham. We've heard some recent buzz that, Josh Williams, the 49ers football director of scouting operations or whatever it is also in the mix. Some people say he's the front runner. Some of the people that said that also said that Robert Saleh was going to be the Falcons' next head coach. So, I wouldn't put too much stock in that. So, the latest buzz is going to be Cunningham, but we'll see. Right. And the Falcons said on Tuesday, when they introduced Matt Ryan as the president of football in all the galaxy, that they were planning on interviewing more GM candidates. It's been 4 days since then, 96 hours or so, or whatever it's been, 108 hours. And the Falcons haven't interviewed a single candidate, haven't announced that they plan on interviewing a single candidate. And so you're like, okay, like, why did we didn't think on Tuesday that they were going to interview more candidates, and they haven't interviewed anybody since then. And it's like, okay, it's like, that little kid, this is going to sound harsh. That little kid that always be lying, when you were growing up, and he's always lying about stuff. Like, it just felt like that's what the Falcons were doing. Like, why are you lying? Like, but maybe they're not lying. Maybe they bring in the hire, but I think a lot of that is going to depend on, what happens this weekend. 49ers just got eliminated. So if they do want to hire Josh Williams, they can hire him now. If the Bears lose tomorrow or Sunday, whenever you're listening to this, then they'll be able to hire Ian Cunningham. So I think we'll get an answer soon, on who the next Falcons GM is. But I don't know if we're going to get an answer on whether or not they're actually going to hire new guys. But, I think with Kevin Stefanski, that GM hire is going to matter, because I think one of the reasons behind that you can blame for the downfall of Kevin Stefanski, again, if you want to make excuses for the struggles of the last few years, you can blame Andrew Berry quite a bit for that, because the Browns never drafted well in the years that Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski were there, and they were there together since 2020. Their drafts, I'm not going to say are terrible, because they did have some hits, but generally, I don't think anybody would consider them to be a team that drafted well over that time. Like, I've seen the people, and just skimming over their drafts. Some people have said, like, this past year was their best draft, right? 2025, I know some people. Locked On Brown said this, right? Whereas, like, they retained Andrew Berry because he had one good draft in 2025. And it's just like, and I was listening to Locked On Brown talk about that, and I was like, that's oddly familiar. There's the same sentiment that Falcon fans had. Falcon fans are basically Jimmy Haslam, where they wanted to retain Terry Fontenot because he had one good draft. After 4 bad ones, in Andrew Berry's case, 5 bad ones. And so that was enough for Jimmy Haslam, who's widely considered to be the worst owner in the NFL. And that was apparently enough for Falcon fans to keep Terry Fontenot. Why am I throwing shade at Falcon fans for wanting to keep Terry Fontenot? Because we don't negotiate with terrorists, guys. here on the Locked On Falcons podcast. And so I will continue to call out all the terrorists in the fan base, or at least the people that have terrorist leanings in the fan base. I'm sorry. I got to take my Terry Fontenot shots whenever I get the opportunity. But all that to say, sorry for going on that rant and that tangent. But essentially, the Browns did not draft well. And that also contributed to the downfall of Kevin Stefanski because they just did not get better as a roster. And basically, I say that just to say that if the next Falcons GM, whether that's Ian Cunningham or Josh Williams or somebody else that they have yet to interview, if that person drafts well, I think that will also be another reason to be more optimistic about Stefanski having greater success in Atlanta than he had in Cleveland, because they're able to add talent to that roster that the Browns just really struggled to do across the last 6 years. So that's going to be an important element of that conversation. So obviously we'll find out more information on that front on what the plan is at general manager. But that's going to do it for me here, guys. Appreciate you for tuning in this Saturday evening. To get this live breaking news on Kevin Stefanski. We'll have more tomorrow from Locked On Browns, as well as more to unpack about this hire. And we'll see. Basically, I will say this, guys, where I fall on on this hire, like think about, the Senior Bowl. I'll be going down to Mobile next week. Where I'm thinking of how I talk about this hire a week from now, once I've done more research, is going to be much more indicative. If you're sitting here, wherever you feel like, because my initial reaction is not what you want it to be, it is what it is. You know me, I just like to do my research first before I get excited about a thing, and it can go in either direction. It can go up, it can go down. We'll see. So I'm lukewarm as we sit here today, but that's not just because I'm a hater or anything. It's just like I don't know enough to really lean positive or negative, and so I'm just kind of neutral on it, and it feels like a safe pick. It feels like if the Falcons wanted to take the upside swing from a passing game standpoint, like that's kind of where I think I give some pause on Stefanski, because again, there are reasons for it because of the quarterback play and all these other things that we've talked about already. But their passing game got worse the longer he was there. The run game was good, but the passing game got worse the longer he was there. And so you're just like, is he just an Arthur Smith, right? With a better offensive line and Nick Chubb than, Arthur, I'm not going to make excuses for Arthur Smith on this podcast, so I'll just leave it there. So that's why I'm kind of lukewarm on it, where it's just like, okay, like, is this more of the same? That's the question I have. And I don't know enough to lean yes or no on that. And that's why, if I'm not as enthusiastic about this hire as you think I should be, it's not just simply because I'm a hater. Yes, I am a hater, but that's not the only reason. And if I'm not as down on this hire as other people are, as some people are, I'm sure, it's not just because I'm a contrarian. It's just, again, I don't know enough to say thumbs up or thumbs down. It's just kind of neutral. That's kind of where I'm at this point in time. So I just want to give you that heads up before you finish hitting send on that angry comment, because I have a slightly different opinion about this hire than you do. So that's going to do it for us here, guys. Appreciate you. We'll be back tomorrow with Locked On Browns, Spencer German, to talk more about Kevin Stefanski, as well as unpack this hire. Continue to make Locked On NFL your second listen, so you can get the scoop on all the things that went down in the divisional round. And of course, check out their Everydayer Club at the link in the description at lockedonfalcons.supercast.com for $5 a month or $50 a year. You can get plenty of perks, including Discord access, where you can talk draft, talk trash, and so much more at the link in the description below. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.